Today we're actually doing something a bit different than what we usually do, as we're going to be talking about the 10 wildest facts about Linux that some of you might, or might not know, or want to learn about for the first time, or to even test your knowledge about the Penguin operating system used by autistic people. I don't really have that much else to say, because, well, the fact video after all, like, what else am I supposed to say? So we might as well get in. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the first fact. Linux used to be under a different license instead of the GPL, when it was under a non-commercial license that did not allow people to fork the kernel. And it changed actually pretty quickly due to Linus Torvalds realizing how bad it was. Back in 1992, when Linux kernel 0.99 released, when he put it under the GPL 2.0, that allows people to fork the kernel and do whatever they want with it, turning to one of the most popular kernels to ever exist, especially after being the most popular after 20 years or so. And plus, so that way this could allow people to do whatever they want with the kernel, which was honestly the best thing to ever come to Linux. One of the first ever versions of Doom was on Linux, and actually a full year before Windows ever got a port. In 1998, ID Software officially released the source code for the Linux version, making it fully open source. And to this day, it's still the only version of Doom that is still fully open source, which has caused many of the Doom ports that you see today on so many weird devices and things out there, and hell, even living creatures. Steam has actually been working on Linux a lot earlier than most people think, as they started adding Linux support to Steam all the way back in 2013, with both Half-Life games and Team Fortress 2 getting Linux support back then. You even got a free item if you play TF2 on Linux soon after launch. Well, of course you can't really get the item anymore due to how many people use Steam Deck and all that, but it's still pretty important. And they also released SteamOS in 2013. Yeah, granted it was a developer thing, but it was still an interesting release that shows how early they were showing support towards Linux to what they did today over 13 years later. Linux has also been used by NASA since as early as the mid-90s, when they tried to replace their supercomputers with standard laptops. And reminder, this is back when Linux was a small open source project, but it was so reliable that NASA still uses it to this day alongside those laptops as their main operating system. Hell, even the Mars rover on Mars, a different planet, runs some sort of Linux, making Linux the first inter-planet operating system. This also plays a part how Linux is technically the biggest operating system in the world, because the mobile operating system known as Android, developed by Google, which runs a modified version of the Linux kernel, sharing multiple aspects with the original kernel, due to nearly being on every phone not made by Apple, and phones being more popular than desktops nowadays. It almost gives almost half of all OS market share according to StatCounter. The Linux kernel is one of the most lightweight kernels out there, with the kernel only taking up 7.3 megabytes of space when compiled, but when Linux 0.1 came out, aka the first version of Linux, it only took up 50 kilobytes. Even though it has grown a lot since, it still makes it a small size compared to other operating systems like Windows, even though Linux has existed for over 30 years now. Linux started off as an open source clone of Minix, not Unix itself directly, even though Minix is technically a version of Unix, but we're not getting into all that right now. And this was only due to Minix only running 16-bit programs. Meanwhile, Linus Torvalds wanted it to run 32-bit programs, but due to it being proprietary, you couldn't really run it that well, as they were the next big thing. And Linus actually pissed off the Minix career so much that he actually said that Linux was already dead. Meanwhile, now barely anybody even remembers Minix or even knows what it is. Meanwhile, Linux is really the most popular operating system in the world. Quite ironic. The Free Software Foundation also tried to make another open source kernel known as GNU HUD, and this was before Linux. But here's the thing, it never took off due to the lack of software, and due to the fact that the Free Software Foundation was taking so long to develop it, than the fact that Linux was already developed. So Linux developed it, and most people started adding GNU to it, so it was pretty much perfect as is to the GNU project. There were still GNU HUD based distros out there, like for example a Debian version, but the number of them is pretty much nothing compared to Linux distros, with less than 10 of them being based on GNU HUD. Also, Linux had other mascots besides Tux. Actually, two of them. The first one was named Twos, a mascot that was made in 2009 to spread awareness about the Tasmanian devil and its disease and going extinct. And that's why it looks like one with the addition of a fake beak to make it more Linux-like. And also another one called Xanatria, I think that's how you pronounce it, a female mascot that designed to look like a fox girl, but was never officially used and was just meant as a proposal mascot. But she ended up losing the Tux, so that doesn't really matter that much anymore. Linux is also the reason why Linus made Git, and it was made to control source code for the Linux kernel, and later turned into the most popular way to get lesser known open source projects on your computer through GitHub, SourceForge, and GitLab, making it one of the most important projects in open source history, alongside the very thing that made Git come into existence in the first place. So that's everything I want to talk about today. I know this is not the most original idea I've ever made by a long shot, trust me, but I have a more unique idea next week. Mostly something that nobody has ever done with Linux before, or barely any people have even thought of doing with Linux. So just wait till then, and keep using Linux, my brothers, and have a wonderful day.